Welcome to Going Deep. This is an RSP cast with my co-host of FF of Angelo FF, Brandon Angelo, and myself, Matt Waldman with the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. And this is episode 1, or we could call it episode 2 if we look at the last one we did as
Right.
the unintentional episode 1.
Sure.
But man, I'm so pleased that we're going to get to do this together. We're going to do this every other week, most months out of the year. And, if you haven't listened to the first one that Brandon and I did, you really should check it out, which was basically, you know, if you should, I basically tells it like, you should listen to this before you watch the NFL draft or forever hold your peace. Because you did
Sure.
such a great job of talking about times and measurements pre-draft with your work as a specialist in working with athletes. And of course, find him at Angelo FF and find the service that he provides, evaluating rookie talent and his insights. We're gonna have a lot of fun bouncing this ball back and forth.
Yeah, man. This is gonna be a ton of fun. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and people have been talking about this for a long time in terms of us collaborating on something, and I'm glad we can finally do it in this capacity where we can bring something really unique and informative and just different to the space. So this is gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and what we're going to kick off with is, I think, a timely issue. I think we feel like this is a timely issue, um, that's probably really in Brandon's wheelhouse in a lot of ways because of your work with athletes on a regular basis, and that's just with training camp. Around the corner, we've had mini camp and OTAs ongoing. Is Let's talk about the physical and mental and emotional adjustment that it takes to become an NFL player.
Yeah.
Because, you think about guys like what Tyler Johnson is a good example, the Minnesota
Hmm.
receiver. I
Yeah.
remember his first camp. He comes in and Bruce Arians is like, "Look, he's a talented player, but he's got to figure out what it's going to take to be an NFL athlete and player. And
Right.
he's behind the curve."
Right.
And that's not an uncommon occurrence.
Yeah, no, and it happens a lot, I think, and it kind of flies under the radar because we don't think of these guys as being underprepared for this sort of thing because you go through the NFL Combine and the physical attributes look really good. Then you get a guy like Brandon Ayuk comes to mind, right? When he was in his first training camp and he was dropping balls left and right. Shanahan said he wasn't mentally all there at the time, and a lot of it stems from you going into college, and a guy like Ayuk went to junior college and JUCO, then balled out, and it's a first round pick, right? You get floated millions of dollars signing bonus, and then what ends up happening is you go to training camp, you expect to perform against other point 0.1, point 0.2 percentile athletes in the world. The difference between those guys, the difference between a fourth string tight end and a Travis Kelce, let's say, isn't necessarily the physical attributes. It's really the preparatory part of it. And also from a mental perspective, being able to attack the details of what every day brings as an NFL player, right? It's not just the on the field work, it's meetings, it's in between that. How are you feeling yourself? Do you have someone to help you out with massage therapy? Do you have a sports psychologist you talk to regular? Like that's the stuff too. When you look at the longevity of being an NFL athlete, that's what gets guys there is that piece of. But a lot of times you go into the league thinking your physical attributes will dominate a game, and it doesn't take you very far because you get the training camp and these guys are just as good as you are who are lining up at DB, or if you're a DB at receiver, etc. And yeah, it's an interesting to kind of see a lot of the guys fall out of the league because of it, right? And Tyler Johnson, you alluded to, I think was for me, he was a really talented profile, as a talented slot receiver in the NFL. But a lot of these guys falter because they don't figure out that it's a literal job. It's not just my physical my quickness, my height, my speed, my power, that's going to get me through and get me from contract to contract. It's the little things that these guys need to do on a day-to-day basis, the recovery, the preparatory stuff, being engaged in meetings and learning the nuance of their position and also the position across from them. That's super important, but that doesn't happen in year one.
No.
So it takes a lot of time, and some guys never figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to share something that I wrote about 7 years ago because Greg Litton, the NFL agent, shared this once on Twitter, and it was a
Sure.
a thing that said football recruiting by the numbers. That there were at the time there were a little over 1 million high school football players, a little over 300,000 high school seniors, and then there were only 70,000 NCAA football players. Only 20,000 of them were freshmen, which meant that 6.5% of the high school pool plays in the NCAA. 6.5 around the country, or from other countries probably too. NCAA seniors playing football, only 15,588, and only 6,500 of them get scouted by the NFL. And only 350 of those 6,500 are invited to the combine, and only 256 are drafted. And while 300 players make the NFL team, that means that only 1.6% of NCAA players made the NFL. And only 150 of those 300 players reached year 4 of their contract.
Right.
And so, he said if you're lucky enough to be one of the 6.5 to become a college player and one of the 1.5 of that percent of that group, of that 6.5% to make the NFL, then you're lucky to get 3 years out of it. And one of the things that I mentioned is that it means if you're a top high school player, you're in the top 93, you're in the 93.5 percentile of all high school players. And then you're in the 98.4 percentile of college players who enter the NFL. And that means that if you get that second contract, then you are less than 1% of all college players. You're in the 99.06 percentile of football players.
Yeah.
And you think, well, and it doesn't look like a big difference between 93.5 percentile and the 98.4 percentile or the 99.06 percentile. But you got to remember if you look at your job and you view it as a job of like errors per million or errors per thousands, and then you start looking at these percentiles and you say, okay, we need to have a certain amount of errors per million. Bad plays that a player would commit over the course of, say, 1 million plays. Okay, so if you're at the 93rd percentile, meaning that you're like a college player, that means you've had 65,000 errors per bad plays out of 1 million. That's what it would come out to if you could somehow play 1 million plays. Sure. But if you're at the 98.4 percentile, that's only 16,000 errors compared to 65,000. And if you're in the NFL, if you make the NFL, that means you only committed 9,400. So, yeah, the difference between 65,000 errors and 9,400 errors is vast. And that means that's the whole point, is like, you said, it's mental, it's maturity, it's understanding how to prepare, how to work. It's not going, well, I'm just going to lean on my talent because I'm good enough. Because you've got to be organized.
Right. The word I loved is error, because what happens is if you keep stacking errors, you get habits, you get bad ones, and bad habits aren't startable players in the NFL.
No,
guys who have bad habits aren't starters. And that's what is really hard to kind of attribute when you're in college, because a lot of college players rely a lot on their talent, especially like, some of your guys who are bigger school guys who are able to do that with, high service level talent, right? Those guys get to the NFL and realize very quickly it is an error-based league.
Yes.
If you make mistakes, you don't play. Not because you make mistakes, But the person who's calling plays or in charge of personnel, their job is on the line. They don't want to lose their job, right?
Yep.
The offensive coordinator putting the most talented receiver out there always doesn't work. He has to put the one that's being mistake free.
Yep.
He's got to run a timing based pattern, and the quarterback has to know where he's going to be, when he's going to be there. And that's the most important thing. And you see guys have really long careers in the NFL just because of that. Adam Thielen, right? Undrafted, has made his career being quarterback friendly.
Yeah.
He's a good enough athlete to be an NFL athlete, but he's made his career being quarterback friendly. Tyler Lockett, another one, right?
Yep.
There's countless guys throughout the league that are going to be long tenured NFL players because they don't make mistakes. They don't make the errors that some of these younger guys do consistently. And it's never really about talent, right? The most talented player in the league isn't always the best player in the league, right? And the best player on the team. And that's the really interesting part when we're talking about some of these guys who are sophomores in the NFL right now, who are potentially going to make that leap. And Treylon Burks is the one that comes to mind most significantly because a guy like Burks, left ACL tear coming out of high school, dealt with a myriad of injuries in college, just little things. But then we saw the conditioning stuff pop up, right? The asthma, the respiratory issues during rookie mini camp and on the training camp last year in Tennessee. And what you saw happened was an athlete who has a ton of ability lose some confidence in that ability. When that happens, it gets a lot harder to do physical tasks because you don't think you're on par with the person next to you who's doing very similar physical tasks, right? And then what ends up happening, you get that snowball effect and you get the soft tissue injuries. Burks had turf toe, some minor joint instability in the big toe as well. So that was a tough thing. But then you kind of saw this offseason in particular. He flashed during his rookie year. But then you see, these people are saying in Tennessee media he's leaned out, right? He looks like he's flying around the field. It's because what happens is you come into the NFL thinking, I have to be fast. You have to play just as fast as you have to process information. It gets much easier to do that the more experience you have, right? Very rarely rookies can have this immediate impact in the NFL from a psychological standpoint. Like guys like Justin Jefferson, that doesn't happen very often, right? They figure that out, the timing aspect of the game quickly. But guys like Burks, I think he's one that can have a really big year because it seems like he's figured out that part of it, right? Where to be, when to be there. And also figured out that the preparatory part of being an NFL player is the most important part of being an NFL player. It's not the physical part. If you want to play 10 years in the league, you're going to deteriorate physically at some point, right? Yeah. It's a hard game. It's, can you stay one step ahead mentally from the guy across from you for the snaps you're on the field, right? That's what matters the most. Some guys figure that out. Some guys don't. And then what does your time look like in the 20 hours a day that you're not playing football, right? Are you making good decisions, right? Are you going to sleep on time? Like just little things like that add up, right? Are you taking recovery seriously? Do you have a nutritionist? Like if you want to stay in the league, that's the stuff that matters. We get wrapped up in the NFL combine and guys jumping far and running fast, and that stuff's great. But if you want to be a second contract guy, you have to really look at the details of what it takes to be a professional and make sure that's the foremost thing that you're doing every single day for sure.
Yeah, it's the narrow margin of error, and part of that is like you described off the field. Because the two stories that I think of that come to mind from players who give testimony to that, Devontae Adams, interviewed last year by the Raiders, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Eric Allen who interviewed him, the former Eagles Raiders cornerback. And he said, listen, physically, I knew I could play in the NFL from my first week in camp. I knew, like, athletically I could compete. That was not an issue. It took me 3 years to understand coverage and adjustments and strategy to face defenders who were veterans on how to beat them and what they were showing me and how to handle that. It took me 3 years, So you think of that, and then you think of all the preparation you said. If you don't sleep well, if you're out partying and you don't feel your absolute best, I mean, you're a finely tuned race car against other finely tuned race cars. So every little thing is going to matter. And if you aren't preparing in that way, then one little bump can completely mess up your performance. And we talk about this, like when I talk about errors, I went further to talk about how this would look if you said, let's limit all these errors to not a million plays, but 640, like 640 plays. All right. In college, that means if you're a good college player, you can get away with about 42 errors in a season, at least on paper. I don't know, this isn't this is theoretical. I mean, we know that errors have different level of weight and all of that. But we see top players screw up all the time, even in the NFL. It's just the degree of the error and things like that. NFL prospects, typically in the college game, they make about 10 errors per season, like big errors probably, that are what you call a fatal error. A NFL vet, 3 years in the league, getting on their fourth, six. That's it. So you look at someone like, say, Tony Gonzalez, who was the other story in this.
Sure.
And when he's on the NFL 100, top 100 players of all time, and they said, what is it that you did that helped you become the player you are? And he said, after my second year, I led the league in drops, and I was depressed. And I was freaking out, like, what am I going to do? And no one thinks of Tony Gonzalez as a guy who drops passes anymore. You don't,
Sure.
You think of him as one of the greatest tight ends of all time in terms of move tight ends. And he said, I read Pat Riley's book. I then started taking notes and realizing that I needed to fix my technique with my hands, like the fundamentals of doing this. And I wrote out a practice regimen for myself, among other things that I did. But I showed the coaches at Kansas City, this is what I need you to help me do before every practice while I warm up, and after every practice while I cool down. And I'm doing this every day that I'm in the facility, and before and after games. And he said that was a big part of turning my game around. So when you're thinking about, guys who come in the league who are like, I'll figure it out. It's just like, people tell them all the time. They come in, like, I was watching, this is a good example. My wife and I occasionally will watch some reality show every once in a while. It's just kind of like our way of saying, let's just watch something kind of mindless and see what this is about. And, typically we come away and go, I would never do that. Like, you could pay us $5 million and we might be able to retire early, but we might be living separately if we did this, because why test something that's good?
Right, yeah.
And they do test you. So like I was telling this to a friend of mine yesterday, and he said, listen, I know someone who early back in the day was like in like the final round of people who were trying to get onto an MTV reality show. And he said from day one, they told them up front, this is what it's going to happen to you when you get on TV. This is generally what happens when people start, when you do something on TV, how the reaction's going to be with your family, with the public. Your public life's going to change, your private life's going to change, your online life's going to change, and these are the things that can happen to you. So think long and hard whether you really want to do this. And so, because he was saying to me, he goes, I have no sympathy for these people if they've been told this right off the bat, and then they go in and then they're complaining about it when they have these reaction shows afterwards. And I said, I get that, but on the same, and by the way, the guy who did this, he was a finalist and he thought about it more, and he said, no, I don't want to do this. Forget it. But
No,
like,
100%.
yeah, but like, I was thinking, yeah, but I work in a profession where I'm evaluating players, and when they get into the NFL as a rookie, they're told this in symposiums by players that they may have even like idolized, and players are like, look, this is the reality. But again, think about telling your kid for the first time what wet is, or what hot is, or what sharp is. They don't have any understanding. So telling someone what professional fame is about before you've experienced it, it's too abstract. And I think that's what happens with a lot of these guys, is that it's too abstract for them to get. Either they've had enough time to get it, and they see enough to be scared of it, or other folks
Right.
go, nah man, the money's going to be great, the women are going to be great, the ability to buy these things are
Well,
going to be
yeah,
great.
it's a different, it's a different, you're basically a different world. You go from being a college student,
Yeah.
to having millions of dollars, and the thing is, there's a lot of layers to that.
Yeah.
Right, from a psychological standpoint, from a familial standpoint, from a presence online standpoint. It's just totally different, and you go overnight and you change like that, and you expect to be the same person, and in reality that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Like, ideally, yes, you remain the same human being, you remain intact to who you are, but imagine if you didn't grow up with money. Imagine what happens when your uncle, your aunt, your third cousins, asking you to pay off their debt, right? Were you going to be a bad family member? Like, that's a conundrum that you weren't tasked with a year prior to being in the NFL.
And then what if your contract changes 8 years into it to where you're having to start taking the vet minimum, and now you can't afford the house your mom wanted, and you're a 49ers lineman who has won Super Bowl rings or been to NFC championships, and the parents are like, well, you promised that you would pay for this house.
Right.
And he's like, I tried to get them to move, but they won't do it. And
you're in trouble. I mean, there's so many great stories about, like, I know Shaq told one about how, he went to the bank and deposited, I think it was first $1 million check in the NBA. And he's like, all right, I bought like 2 Corvettes and bought something else, and, bought a house and bought a pool table and bought all these cool jewelry pieces and all these accessories. And then he talked to his money manager, and he's like, we're $200,000 in the hole. He's like, what are you talking about? I only spent $800,000. He's like, taxes and that's the thing, like, these guys don't get taught. Like, that's the thing is, like, like Shaq, obviously
most people don't get taught about taxes.
No, and that's the crazy. This is not a tax podcast, but this is the crazy thing about getting into like legitimate generational wealth.
Yeah, is
when that happens, you don't know what to do with it, because it's not what it seems. If you get $1 million in Washington, D.C. is different than getting $1 million in California. And that's the crazy thing, is like, if you get your first, signing bonus and it's $3 million, that looks different city to city. Yeah. And that's the thing that's super tough, is you think, oh my gosh, I'm just going to buy all this stuff overnight. I'm going to go buy my mama a home. I'm going to go, pay off my girlfriend's medical school. No, that's what gets. That's the crazy part about it. You make all these,
Georgia, $3 billion, California.
Exactly, and that's the crazy part about it. And that's really too, like, when we talk about what makes it hard for guys to be really good, like second contract, third contract players, even, it's like the psychological stress of what this is doing. And that's what we never take that into account. We just think it's a physical game. These guys get worn down. But I think a lot of it has to do with the psychological stress of having to take care. And you're immediately moved up the hierarchy of your family. If you think about this, right? And that's the crazy part about this. Most of these guys who come from middle class or lower families to start just vault immediately up to the most important person in your whole family. And that's super stressful as a 21, 22-year-old kid.
Yeah, you're not 44.
No.
And you've had 20 years to, like, watch this, like, start to evolve.
You had no time to let this thing ascend. You're just there now at the top of the mountain. And I think that's a really interesting discussion to have when we talk about, NFL players and athletes in general, is how hard that is to happen so quickly, but also try to focus on playing the game at the highest level. Yeah. Right. That's super difficult. And that's why I think it takes it takes certain positions way longer to adapt to the NFL than others, right? I think that's a tough thing. Like receivers, tough. Running backs, tough. Quarterback is extremely hard because that's the that's the media position, right? That's the position everybody wants to know. So you have to be really on your game from like a psychological standpoint, and also understand the stresses around you and how to mitigate those in order to play your best game on the field. And that's the beauty of professional sports, is we don't talk enough about the stressors that aren't the physical ones, right? But that's the crazy stuff, man. The layers to it are just endless, it seems.
Yeah, there's three things that come to mind about this, because one is that, I've often talked about the author Elizabeth Gilbert, who I've never read any of her books, but I think she's famous for that. Eat, Pray, Love is the name of the book. And she did a TED Talk once that I listened to, and it was really insightful because she talked about fame, and she said, fame is, if I were to describe fame, I would tell you it would be taking the essence of who you are, and fame takes that and casts it as far away from your body as you could possibly imagine. And your job, basically, in some part of your mind, you realize that you've got to find it. You've got to go and find it, or you're forever going to be lost. And then when you do find it, oftentimes when you reclaim it, people are going to reject you en masse because they don't like who you were in the first place or who you really are. And you have to learn to accept that and understand that fame is going to go up and down, but who you are is going to be the stable thing in your life. The second thing, and I think about that with a lot of these players, because they have those moments where they go, oh, I'm famous, I can do this and I can do that, and then they realize, no, what, and then I have, Sigmund Blumen, I've often joked that this is what's called the career near-death experience, that sometimes players have this because they come to grips with their career mortality much earlier than they expected and realize, oh, this is a job, and I have to love this grind or figure out how to do this grind even if I don't love it, which is why NFL teams are so obsessed with trying to find people who love the game, because they know there's people who don't, but for people this young, they're looking for folks who have that hyper competitive, I love the work, I love getting up at 6 a.m. and doing this. But even then, there's a guy, Chad Kelly's a great example, who, we all know I'm contractually obligated to mention him on every podcast, but and you're going to learn this, but the joke is, I mean, you look at him in the CFL, and he's playing well to begin with. He played great at the end of the season. His Indianapolis quarterback coach told the Montreal Alouettes, according to Russ Landy, who's, the RSP does a podcast with Scout Talk, that they told the Alouettes that Chad Kelly has the talent to be the next Doug Flutie, Warren Moon, Jeff Garcia, in terms of like coming up there, winning a number of Grey Cups, and then getting a shot in the NFL later on in his career again. And he went there because he realized he turned down NFL offers to like be a reserve on teams, because I think he felt like, A, I'm going to get stuck and labeled as a reserve because of what I did in Denver. And B, because of what I did in Denver, I finally realized, after what I did at Ole Miss and what I did before that at Clemson, that I have a problem. And I have to figure out how to keep myself stable and not self-destruct. Because talent-wise, he was faster than Deshaun Watson. He was a dual threat quarterback who could throw the ball a mile, who literally Hugh Freeze and Dabo Sweeney were like, oh yeah, as a player, this guy should be a first round NFL pick.
100%.
Like, without a doubt. And the way he leads people on the field, the way he sees the field, what he can do running, amazing. But the problem is that you see what he would do, and he comes before he even gets to Clemson, he's like telling the second string quarterback's kid, last name Stout, I'm trying to remember the first kid's name, but like, yeah, get ready for me to beat you out, like in a really cocky way on social media. Gets in arguments with coaches. They were like, yeah, we couldn't deal with that. and then like the fight outside the nightclub, rushing on the field of his to protect his brother may have been an iffy thing, and then what happens in Denver. So you look at this and you go, there's a pattern of, and I was told, he when he got to Denver, he was so beaten up, he still had like a. It wasn't the ACL injury that he had that they were worried about. He had hernia surgery and hadn't reshaped his body from the surgery and played through his final season at Ole Miss and was still not the same athlete he was, even though I'm watching him like split a Georgia cornerback and safety for a 50-yard gain, and you're going, and your body's beaten up like that? Wow. So he comes into Denver, and he's literally on the field by himself before and after practices running through the entire playbook. And he's literally pushing the team every day because I Cecil Lammy's a beat writer there, and I know him well. And Cecil's like, yeah, he was literally every day asking the coaches until the coaches just said, listen, you're not going to be on the active roster until we tell you need to just rest. You need some rest. You need to get your body right. Like, learn the system. Just keep practicing. He's like, no, but I want to compete. I want to play. All of the things you really want. Like, first one in, last one out, all of that. But when he got his opportunity, he self-destructed off the field. So there's something there maturity-wise that he had to learn. That he had to learn, like, that the psychological aspect wasn't there. And I think that we don't know if he's completely figured it out, but it sounds like for him to say, I need to take a step back and build my way up, that's a sign of maturity, especially in the face of this type, in the face of like, I could stay in the NFL, but where I really want to go, I need people to notice that that I can be something more. And if it means that I have to dominate in another league, I'll take that chance rather than staying here.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it's about, reinventing yourself if you have to, right? And some guys never figure that out, that they need to do that. And whatever capacity it may be that's holding them back. But like guys like Johnny Manziel, right? Like there's reasons they don't make it that are not physical whatsoever, right? Johnny Manziel was an unbelievable talent at the position.
Yes.
But we know why he didn't figure it out. And he's publicly admitted why he's never figured it out. And that happens time and time again. So,
Tom
it's
Marinovich,
crazy.
Go way back in the day. A guy who can do what he did on heroin and play even in the league, and throw, all the things that he did.
That was before my time, but my goodness. Yeah.
But like he was the original of those guys in terms of examples. But like back to Treylon Burks, your point, here's a guy who figured it out, because one of the stories that's come out this spring was, well, he didn't want to be late for camp, and apparently he realized that he wasn't going to be able to book a flight on time commercially.
Yes, I read that. Yeah,
so
that was
he
cool.
chartered a jet. That tells you he already got a taste of Mike Vrabel and what the NFL was going to be like under Mike Vrabel, who's a no-nonsense Patriots guy, where they would cut you or trade you if you were late, even in a snowstorm.
The Jonas Gray story. Yeah.
Yes, Jonas Gray, Randy Moss, and Adalius Thomas story. Those are two that happened to them. Randy Moss. Like, to me, like that should tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
And he took it upon himself in year 2 to go, I'm not making that mistake.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
That's a sign.
Yeah, it's a big. I mean, that means a lot. That means more than whatever you could say physically that he did to kind of make himself better. It's the being on time. Like, that's the stuff that really, because that's gonna show up on game day, right? You show your teammates that you're willing to be the guy, especially in the Titans receiver room that is him and Kyle Phillips, Nick Ikeni, Westbrook.
Yep.
You don't have a lot there. The only thing, if DeAndre Hopkins goes there, I think that's a good thing for a kid like Treylon Burks,
without a doubt,
who has a lot of growth to go, learning from a guy who's a veteran and one of the best receivers of this generation. And Robert Woods, I think, was really good for Treylon as well. But I think we're seeing this across you mentioned Alec Pierce kind of growing up and into being, hey, this could be a guy on the Colts that could be the guy. at the position, and that's what it really takes, right? Is taking, doing the little things and doing the extra that it takes to be great. Because all these guys, I liken it to, hey, I'm a surgeon. Okay, we have a lot of surgeons, but who is the best surgeon?
Yeah.
In your specialty, right? Who is the best heart surgeon? Who is the best, cardio, whatever it is,
Yeah.
who is the best at that specialty, right? You just being a surgeon is cool. It's great, right? You made it, right?
Yep.
You beat everybody, but are you willing to beat the 1% of the 1%? And that's what happens with the guys. We see it all the time. That's the difference between the guys that stay in the league for a long time, make it a true career, and guys that flame out after 3 years. Because the money's great. You make a few $1,000,000 in 3 years. Might spend it all, right? You have to, and that's the thing is, you might be out of a job by 26 years old.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think about. What are you going to do for the rest of your life, right? And that's I don't think gets not a lot of thought gets brought to. But I mean, that's something too. Like, doesn't matter where you're drafted or what round. Like, that's a possibility. And guys figuring that out is the difference between making it and not. And for you, besides Treylon Burks and Alec Pierce, who are some of those year 2 guys that you think have figured it out or need to figure it out in order to kind of take that next step?
I think Khalil Shakir, the Buffalo Bills wide receiver, is a guy that's in a position where if he has figured it out, his career could take a major uptick, with Stephon Diggs having some rancorous issues with Josh Allen or the coaching staff. Maybe all that's much ado about nothing, and they'll be fine come September. But even with Josh Allen giving a little passive aggressive, talk in the media when he said Trent Sherfield doesn't complain, like other players. After a practice saying that sounds like a bit of a pointed comment at Diggs. Now, when you look at this team, Gabriel Davis is a nice play action option who can win deep when he gets behind his zone. He's a nice player off schemed plays where he sneaks behind, but one-on-one contested catches, that's not him. So he's never was going to be a number one. Dalton Kincaid might wind up being the de facto number one, a la Travis Kelce type of player.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, you look at a guy kind of in that same, like Zach Ertz vein.
Yes.
Where he's just a total safety blanket. Like, this is, he's going to be, he's going to be on time. He's going to be available when you need him in the red zone. And that's the thing. There's 2 low red zone players in this class that I think you're going to make their quarterbacks very happy. And one is Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be Josh Allen's best friend in the red zone. And Tank Dell. In Houston.
I can see that.
I think that's the thing is, like, if your quarterback can trust you in the most important area of the field, and everything else is easy.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing is, I think he can become that with Stephon Diggs, which is if Stephon Diggs is in Buffalo, which we don't know what's going to happen. I assume he will be. I assume it works out. But, I mean, that's a big deal for, I think Kincaid in that offense, being that middle of the field safety blanket that Josh Allen kind of needed since Cole Beasley.
Yeah.
Right. You didn't have that last year with Isaiah McKenzie.
Yeah. And I think, though, but that's the thing. I think Kincaid is the type of player that also can give them that contested catch on the outside.
Yep.
And he has run after the catch ability that's a little underrated, I think.
Yeah, he can work all 3 levels, and I think that when I evaluated him on an annual analysis and broke down what he does well, that was the one thing I pointed to was he's one of those guys after the catch you don't realize, but he's picking up 5, 6, 7 yards.
Yeah, always making either the first man miss or breaking an arm tackle to his legs. And when you look at that, you could see where this team's a little bit in a flux, because I think they're looking at him and going, I think we've got a stud here in terms of like a top-notch elite player. And then we've got Diggs where we got some problems. Can a guy like Shakir, who earned Josh Allen's trust in a lot of big plays, contested catches in tight zone windows, some late game plays getting open where he needed to, and showing that the acumen was there. And he's the only guy on that roster who can play probably flanker or slot.
Can play multiple positions, and that's
Yeah.
Davis is relegated to he's playing X and he's off play action, and that's really it.
Yeah.
Diggs is your Z, your movement Z, and then you're gonna have Kincaid a lot in the slot too. So I think the only other guy, you're absolutely right, is between Shakir and Sherfield.
Yeah. So if Shakir shows one that the mental part of the game is down and he's really locked in with Allen, and as a result of that he's not making the the kind of thoughtless mistakes of focus drops because he's executing a beat slow mentally that often happens. You're looking at a guy who he may not give you Stephon Diggs numbers. I'm not expecting that at all. But in year 2, maybe you're looking at an 800, 900,000 yard receiver.
That jump is definitely possible, because why not in that offense, right? I mean, they haven't added a significant running back, right? I mean, you have Damian Harris, you have James Cook, you don't have a guy who's going to run the ball 20, 25 times. Yeah. So what you're going to do is they're going to throw the rock, and it's going to be, there's going to be 3 guys in that offense are going to be relevant. Yeah. And I think it's going to be Diggs. Kincaid, I think, is going to be that second guy, and that third guy could very well be Shakir.
Yeah, if it's not Cook,
absolutely,
absolutely, and Cook's raring to go. But how much are they going to use Cook? That's
the question. There. And 2, are they going to pick his older brother? That's another question too. Yeah. That could very well happen. So I think with all these, there's a lot of veterans that haven't been signed yet that I think are going to be waiting for more of a contender mid-season. You have Zeke, you have Fournette,
Hunt,
Kareem Hunt. Yep, Kareem Hunt. You have Dalvin Cook now.
Yeah.
You have some really intriguing guys that still have a little bit of tread left on the tires. That can bring competition to a already stable backfield potentially.
I'll give you another one that's interesting to me, and he's in your part of the country, and a fan and part of the team that I've been a fan of, and that's David Bell, who because you look at David Bell and it's like, okay, we know he's not speedy, but his game at its best has some stylistic comparisons to guys like a Larry Fitzgerald or DeAndre Hopkins in terms of not a burner, but can be physical, can win at the catch point, finds openings, blocks well. You can move him around a little bit and take advantage. And listen, I mean, we look. Cedric Tillman is an intriguing young player, and they drafted him early, and I think there's value there. But you also look at the rest of this team, and Donovan Peoples-Jones, I mean, certainly, to me, I mean, if I were to give in a fantasy parlance, just give a name of a player or two and just say, I know that's not fair to just slap a label like this and there's more context to it, but if someone said to me, what's Donovan Peoples-Jones' career going to be like? I said, I would bet on guys like Dante Moncrief, Chris Conley, Demarcus Robinson. He would be in that list of names more than he would be in a list of names of guys who become perennial top starters. So Bell has a shot.
I think so too. For me, when I evaluated Bell, I'm like, this is an Allen Robinson type player because of how he wins. Right, this is not a guy who wins, with a ton of quickness, a ton of downfield speed, but he wins with tact and nuance that ages well. Right, and I think NFL offensive corners are going to start to figure out that, okay, this guy's going to be reliable down to down. And I think the Browns needed that guy other than Amari Cooper.
Yeah.
So, and I think they're going to, rely on that more now too with, they're going to, I think it's going to be more of a one-back system without Kareem Hunt there, presumably. And I think, Stefanski's going to want to utilize Deshaun Watson's strengths more off play action. And that's a super big one too when you're talking about you need a guy who can win in the middle of the field if you're going to win off play action, right? And I think right now it can't all be Amari Cooper. So I think they're going to need to find that guy. And I think David Bell fits the profile
Maybe more
of
so
someone who
than
can be there.
Njoku, who is kind of an up and down
He's a
player.
he's a weird player because
Yeah.
he's kind of like in that, I think, that Jonnu Smith type.
Yes.
I think
Thank
that's the
you.
role that I think is that would be much better suited for him than pigeonhole him into traditional tight end.
Yeah.
Because I think he does need more traditional running back type touches, right? Because he is so good with the ball in his hands and giving the ball on line of scrimmage and being that guy, right? I like Chicago a ton in Tennessee because they're doing that with him. And that's the type of player Njoku is. I think Hooper is a better fit for that offense than Njoku is, because of what Deshaun Watson likes to do, especially in the red zone.
It's going to be between Harrison Bryant.
I know, because Hooper's gone, so it's going to be it's me Bryant, and I like Bryant too, but I think it's going to be interesting to see if they utilize Njoku at the line of scrimmage more often,
or Bell
in the slot, or they're going to use Bell.
Yeah,
I think Bell offers you the more reliable presence there, especially in the red zone.
Yeah.
But I think from your point, that's a guy too. Especially if we're talking in the fantasy realm, you can get David Bell for super cheap.
Yeah.
And he's a guy that can stick around the league for a while, which is super important. You get a bench stash for a couple of years and he ends up being a potential Pro Bowler because he can catch 90 balls, right?
Can I give you two more and then I want to hear who else you're thinking too?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So they're both Chiefs.
Okay.
Sky Moore.
Yep, I love it.
Matt Harmon did a great job of discussing this. I saw this on an Instagram, segment of what his podcast was saying that, listen, the Chiefs, kind of broke his game down a little bit and said, hey, we're going to have you learn all three spots. We want you to do, and you kind of had to learn that on the fly. So this year's that, how much has he been able to build on that? And I've been, I've talked a lot about Kadarius Toney and he's not the guy I'm going to be talking about here, but I've talked a lot about him in recent weeks saying that, listen, he's probably going to be that number one receiver if you ask me, even though our primary receiver in Kansas City is Travis Kelce, which means that he can be more of a Juju Smith-Schuster plus type of player and not quite a Tyreek Hill. He can be between Hardman, Schuster, and Hill, and give you a top 15 season, even if he's not Tyreek Hill level play,
right?
And not running primary receiver routes because all the things they can do with him. But on that note, what's interesting is that when you look at the Chiefs' offense the past 5 years, most of the fantasy pie goes to the tight end, the number one receiver, and the quarterback and running back. Yeah. So everyone hoping for Mecole Hardman or hoping for Sky Moore, and if Kadarius Toney stays healthy, it's kind of a lost hope if Toney is the number one, stays healthy. But it's not just Sky Moore. What about Justin Ross? Yeah,
it's a good one. It's a really good one.
Because when you watch Ross, when I watch Ross, to me, I know there are people like, oh, he could have been like AJ Green or Julio Jones, and it's like, no, he's not that player to me. But could he have been what people thought Corey Davis might become, or what Hakeem Nicks was in his peak? Absolutely. And he ran a West Coast. He'd be a great fit in a spread offense with West Coast underpinnings. As that guy you can put on the island on one side.
Yeah, you just put him at X and he's a ball winner. And that's what they don't have. They haven't had that, right?
That's right.
They have Travis Kelce and then a lot of guys to play different roles. And I like how you brought up Sky Moore because people forget he was a DB when he got to Western Michigan, and he had a COVID year and another year of ball, and now he's in the NFL. And he's a guy too that's just so dynamic as an accelerator. You put him in the slot and let him win, and I think he's giving him a two-way goes and be a nightmare for defense with Patrick Mahomes. And I think he can be a really good slot receiver in the NFL, giving him time to develop in the Andy Reid system, which is a complex system for receivers to play. Yeah. We've kind of figured that out. God, I like Justin Ross a ton too. He's just, he was with the injury and everything. We never knew if he was a first, second round talent who didn't get drafted.
And apparently Reid said this spring Patrick Mahomes trusts him. And it's like, okay, you're telling me in May or June that Patrick Mahomes trusts this receiver already? That's kind of cool. I don't know. We'll see, if it's just
Yeah,
talk. But when your head coach says that, I think that's pretty telling, because why would he say that knowing what his offense is
right,
about?
right.
So, yeah, and when we look at the injury, I mean, when the specialist says, yeah, he has no greater of a chance of getting a catastrophic injury than any
Right.
other player who's never even had what he had. And then you look at the foot injury that he had. Yeah,
Just a
people have just written
yeah.
him off. He's good.
Right. Yeah. 100%. And all it takes for because it's a wide open competition there.
Yeah.
Right. I think Tony has a leg up on his starting job. Obviously, he played really well in stretches last year at the end of the year. But besides Tony and Travis Kelce, there's no tertiary target.
No. I mean,
So
Richie James is fascinating for me.
sure,
I
yeah,
love Richie James
yeah,
as a
for
player,
sure.
but like
Right.
they don't see him
No, no, no.
that way.
I agree. 100% agree. I think for me, the one that sticks out as kind of the second year guy is Kyle Phillips.
Oh
I,
yeah, yeah, I love him.
I love Kyle Phillips, and I think big reason is Brian Tannehill doesn't have a safety blanket, right? Treylon Burks can definitely become a guy that he can be 1,000-yard plus guy, but Kyle Phillips can be a Hunter Renfrow light-ish player where he's going to win the middle of the field, be a chain mover on third downs, and be what that offense needs because they don't have that. And he played really well in the preseason last year. Obviously got hurt and was missed a large stretch of the season, but totally written off. Like,
Yeah.
and if they don't get DeAndre Hopkins, he is the de facto number 2 target in that offense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Him and Chicago. I mean,
Yeah.
then that's the thing is, I think we talk about a player that's going to make us a year 2 leap. I think it's going to be him. I think my next guy, and it's not even a leap because I thought he was really freaking good. Jahan Dotson.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I think that kid's an absolute baller. And I think here goes this. I think he has a higher ceiling than Terry McLaurin.
Yeah.
I think he's more of a 3-level winner. I think Terry's one of the best jump ball receivers in the NFL, one of the best deep threats in the league, I think. But a guy like Jahan Dotson can be everything you want to be in the red zone. Can win the short areas of the field. You can give him the balls on screens and jet touches, and he can be the focal point of an offense. I don't think Terry is. I think Terry is he can be a high-end secondary option in the NFL, in my opinion. But I think Jahan Dotson's a chance to be the guy there before long. Will Sam Howell pan out? Another second-year guy. Don't know. I think that's a big question, coming into his year 2 is he going to be the long-term answer? Because he has a very short lease. He has 17 games to figure it out, or they're drafting a quarterback next year.
Yeah.
And regardless if that's Rocky or not, I think Dotson has a chance to really ascend into being a primary receiver in throughout the league, not even just in that offense, for sure.
Okay, I got 3 more.
Love it.
Okay.
Give me 3 more.
Okay. Isaiah, not Isaiah. Jerome, what's his name? Ford, the kid.
Jerome Ford,
Jerome
Cincinnati.
Ford, yeah.
Yeah.
Jerome Ford with Cleveland. Because
Yeah.
we know that Nick Chubb, everyone wants Nick Chubb to get his and like be what all he could be. I think everyone would like to see that if you're a football fan. But
Sure.
I think we also know that Jerome Ford may not get all of Kareem Hunt's touches, but I would think the Browns coaching staff looks at this and says, "Hey, if Ford looks like he makes that next step and goes beyond playing well on special teams and shows up both in the passing game and the way that he showed some promise at Cincinnati, we could incorporate him in that Kareem Hunt sort of way and spell Chubb, or maybe even split enough with Chubb that he could give you some fantasy value." And I think that they're really hoping that happens. So
Okay.
You know,
I like that. Yeah, I like even when you look at a guy like Ford, his speed was such a big part of his game at Cincinnati,
yeah,
right? And if you're if running a little more outside zone, I think you're going to see him really pop.
yeah.
I like that a lot. Okay, give me the
Okay,
other two.
all right. This one's an odd one, and it's a tough mix. But I was always a Skylar Thompson fan, so much so that
Okay, yeah, I
Skylar,
know you are.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
but when I watched his games last year, I felt I watched a lot of dropped passes in key moments, and I know they brought Mike White in, but I think they brought. I'm gonna propose this narrative that may be from
Okay,
outer space, but I'm okay with putting my tinfoil hat on this one with this one, which is they got Mike. I propose that they got Mike White not only because they wanted to have him continue to compete with a second year quarterback who was basically a seventh round pick, and they saw what Mike White did in that division, and Mike White can tell them about the Jets offense a little bit too. If they need a little bit extra eyes to talk about what the Jets were doing 2 times a year that can help them. But they're worried about Tua, low key worried about Tua and those head injuries. And
high key word about Tua.
yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
100%.
So when you do that, you're like, we like Skyler. And certainly after the season, McDaniel said, I thought Skylar Thompson played well enough to be in the competition for the quarterback 2 role in, regardless of who we had in free agency. And Thompson has played well early on in OTAs. And I think that, again, first year and played well enough to earn a 3rd spot that they weren't anticipating reserving for a quarterback, and then they had to use him. And while it wasn't great in the box score, you saw up and down moments with him, but not moments that I looked at and go, he can't handle playing in the NFL. I think there's some growth there. So I could see a scenario where they keep 3 quarterbacks again because they're so worried about Tua, and it'd be Thompson who winds up the number 2 and White as the number 3.
I think from a talent perspective, it makes a ton of sense. And I think you're right in that the Dolphins are very worried about Tua and his longevity. You don't go from mauling retirement
Right.
to being the franchise guy for the next 5 to 8 years.
No.
Like, that's just not going to – I don't think it's going to work out for any team with Tua. I think it's I don't want to be this – this bad marriage there, but I don't think it's going to last. I mean, but who's the quarterback going to be? I have no idea, but I like Skylar Thompson as someone they might give a shot to because he knows the system, right? And he's developed in it from year 1 with McDaniel, and I think that's a big deal when you're talking about the loyalty. I think that's a big aspect of what McDaniel. When you listen to him speak, that's a big deal in terms of what he preaches and Tua being the guy. And I think the loyalty part of it's one of the reasons why Tua came back.
Yeah,
is he knows he has as long a leash as he needs.
He's he's the guy you're gonna watch on the waiver wire. You're just gonna know you're gonna know who he is. You're gonna know that maybe you shouldn't just write him off because of what the box score looked like. And if suddenly, Tua gets hurt, he's that guy that you go, you know what? If I can pick him up first come first serve, or if I know that I have an extra room and I need some quarterback help, and I know I'm probably going to try and trade for someone down the line or hope that somebody better is available when I actually need the quarterback. But right now, I just want to hedge on somebody because I have that extra roster spot in a deeper league. That's the guy you pick up and you just say, if Tua gets hurt, this guy might end up being in the mix for you and go from there. The other guy that I was looking at as a second-year player, let me just make sure that there was nobody else that I was super looking at other than this player, because I thought I had thought of somebody else and then promptly forgot them in the excitement of discussing some other players. But okay, so going back here, let's see, where are you? Oh man, who is it? No, that's not the team. That's not the team. All right. Okay. Keontae Ingram with
Yeah,
Arizona.
there we go.
You know?
That's a great one. That's a great one. He was good at Texas too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people under because he was he was behind his Bajan's freshman year.
Yeah.
He was behind him and he had the fumbling issues. Then he went to USC and was really good there for his senior year. But yeah, James Conner is I think here goes this. That offense is going to look a lot different because I think they know Kyler Murray isn't the long-term answer.
No.
And they don't have a real primary option at receiver in that offense. James Conner's a placeholder. You might as well see what you have with Keontae Ingram and giving him some more run than he got last year. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, and it's just one of those deals where last year, he was undrafted or a seventh round pick. I don't remember which.
Just sixth, seventh round pick.
Pick. Yeah. Third or fourth on the depth chart, competing with Jonathan Ward, who's a good special teamer and good receiver out of the backfield, but now on the Titans. And maybe a little bit higher up on the Titans after Hassan Haskins
that whole ordeal.
Ordeal off field. But Benjamin was the talk of camp last year. They didn't expect it. He ended up their number 2. He got significant touches when Connor was banged up, and by year's end, Benjamin wasn't on the Cardinals, and now he's fighting for a job for the New Orleans Saints. And who's the number 2? Keontae Ingram. Keontae Ingram, who they just said, he intrigued us with what he did in camp and a little bit in the preseason games, but we haven't seen enough of him yet. And they saw enough of him to make him their number 2 and not add anyone yet in free agency or draft anyone.
That's the big one. That if you look at kind of how things are aligning, especially with that backfield, that's a big one because they're looking towards the future, right? I mean, that's not a great rushing attack right now whatsoever. But when you look at what Keontae Ingram brings to the table, he profiles as a 3-down back. He catches the ball well out of the backfield. That's one of his better traits. He runs with good power. He's quicker than you think. He comes in the league 6 feet, 221
There's
pounds.
a lot of Kareem Hunt to his style.
Yes, exactly. And he has a lot of things that an NFL offensive coordinator would want to do because what you can do is you can leave him on the field.
Yeah.
And that's an important piece, especially what the Cardinals have done traditionally in the past, is they've done that. They've left whoever, like James Conner, for example, they just left him on the field for 3 downs. Because he's solid in all 3 areas, and you can just leave him there and leave him be. But I think Keontae Ingram gets a shot to be the starter in 2024.
Yeah.
I think there's no reason not. I think this team is closer to rebuilding than people might want to think. And I think running back is the last thing you want to think about when you're talking about pieces to get for an offense. I think Ingram could be a potential future piece for a pretty cheap price at Dynasty for sure.
Without a doubt. So let's end it with this. You mentioned Kyler Murray. And
okay.
And what you mentioned was interesting because it resonated with me too. And I had Bob Harris asked me this on a Monday podcast that we do of like, Kyler Murray, is he for long in Arizona? And my thought, like you, was it's hard to see that with all that's happened that these two coexist, that these two parties coexist. And when I look at Kyler Murray's game, obviously he's capable of high-end NFL production.
100%.
Yeah. But is he the type of player that is it simply he didn't gel well with Arizona? Or is it a little bit of you look at the pattern and am I looking at this, is this a pattern worth putting together, or is it just one that we go, maybe it's just a bunch of narratives that we shouldn't discuss, but you go, did he really just want to play baseball and he wound up playing football? And as a result of that, did he necessarily, people talk about the body language and the grimacing and the faces and the work clause in the contract and all those things, and you go, is all of that may not be true, but it's a lot of smoke around one theme, which is did he really want to be a football player?
It's I was talking to somebody else about this, and someone asked me about Kyler Murray, and for me, it's what we talked about at the beginning of the show was the maturity, the preparatory part of it. Is that guy going to put in the work necessary to be the best at his craft? And there has not been ever an answer to yes that Kyler Murray will or has.
Yeah.
Because he hasn't, right? He's one of the more physically talented quarterbacks in the NFL, despite his height, but he hasn't put it together, and I don't think he ever will, especially in Arizona. And I think the issue is your quarterback has to be your emotional leader. In today's day and age, way more so than in the past. I think, it was more a field general, right? Now your emotional leader of a locker room is your quarterback, your Jalen Hurts, your Patrick Mahomes. Those are your leaders, right? Those are the guys, you go to war for those guys. Well, you guys aren't going to war for Kyler Murray.
No.
And I don't think, I think at broad spectrum, guys aren't going out of their way to praise a guy like that. Yeah. To say this guy is doing such a magnificent job learning the offense. This guy's building. No, he's not that guy. To me, he's a Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
Wherever he went, he was not very liked. For whatever reason, he always rubbed somebody the wrong way, or he wasn't their favorite person in the locker room, right? They didn't love being led by him, right? And this is a guy that almost won a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And technically did, but almost won a Super Bowl in Philadelphia. And you look at what happened between him and Jalen Hurts. What's the difference between those two? It's not talent whatsoever. It's one guy was willing to take every opportunity that came to him and take advantage of it, and Carson Wentz just didn't.
Yeah.
After the injury in particular, and that's the thing too. That's my worry with Kyler Murray. Is going to follow that career arc of the Carson Wentz. The might bounce around a few spots, might be given a couple more shots, but is he going to
back up? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is he going to stick? In the league. Yeah, and that's the thing is you're going to have to. He's going to be quote unquote the project. Yeah. Because you're going to have to get him to buy into being a leader and being, the emotional mouthpiece of a team. But right now, that's just not in his personality, which is a dangerous game to play in the NFL when you have such good leaders at the top of this food chain in Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. If you're not that type of leader, it is going to be very hard to beat those teams. They will play for those two guys in particular. And I think Joe Burrow is another one of those. Those three, good luck beating those three if you're not on par with that type of leadership and just emotional intelligence from that perspective.
When I see Kyler Murray on film, and I may be stretching this way too far, but I like throwing this by you to see. Ever since watching him in college, the thing that bugged me on the field, even though the talent's obviously there, I mean, that ability to run and create on the move and buy time is fantastic.
Right.
The ability to efficiently buy time is awful. Like, it's because when you watch, you look at Tom Brady. If you took Kyler Murray and put him in the Buccaneers offense last year with that offensive line banged up, Kyler Murray would not win the number of games Tom Brady
He becomes
did.
Malik Willis.
Yes.
Rookie Malik Willis. That's what he becomes.
Yeah, because
100%.
He runs from spot to spot. And when you run from spot to spot and you're not an efficient mover where the ball is in position for you to let it go and you can take 2 or 3 or 4 steps and let it out and you're still have your eyes on your receiver or your body in position to let it go, now your receivers are just working to that next window and the ball comes out, and even though buying that extra second helped your receiver get the catch. But when you do what he does, he may buy 8 seconds, but his receivers have now had to reroute at least once, if not twice, in order to
Mhm.
catch a ball. And when you only generate one good play every 2 games, where that's a highlight worthy play, but the rest of the time you're doing that, it doesn't work out, and now you're making faces at your receivers.
Yep. And you
And
look at Hard Knocks. If you
yes,
watched Hard Knocks,
no,
that
I
was the one
haven't.
thing go watch Hard Knocks. And for me, I love watching the mannerisms of the players to see like if you can pick up on, especially Kyler Murray, because he's kind of on the microscope on Hard Knocks for a good reason. Watch his interactions between him and DeAndre Hopkins. There's a reason
Okay.
he's not. There's the reason D Hop isn't coming back.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was a big one. Was just like the blame, the accountability aspect, I should say, wasn't there. No matter if you watch NFL, Network does their like little things on like Peyton Manning and some of the. You watch if Peyton Manning made a mistake, he would go up to Reggie Wayne and say, "Reggie, it's my fault, man.
Yeah.
That's my bad. I was late on the ball, whatever." Okay, even if it wasn't
Yeah.
his mistake, and he knows it wasn't, he'd sometimes be like, "You know what? That's my fault."
Yeah.
Because he knows the confidence of his guys is that's the most important thing. And they're not dumb. They know, hey, might have been my mistake. But if you know what, if he's going to tell me that he wants to be accountable for that, that's a noble thing to do from the leader of our locker room. Kyler Murray just would not do that. He'd throw the hands up and be like, "What are you doing, DeAndre?" DeAndre Hopkins he's a veteran of veterans at his
Yeah.
position.
He should be asking, what were you doing that I need to know?
Exactly.
Not
And
what were you doing?
Exactly. And that's what really threw me with Kyler Murray was there never seemed to be, just watching that piece of it, right? There never seemed to be any accountability surrounding the mistakes. And also, he didn't have the two attributes that are most important for quarterbacks, in my opinion, today's era: consistency and efficiency.
Yep.
Wasn't consistent, wasn't on time, and he was never efficient with his movements.
Yeah.
Ever. Everything was erratic. Nothing was pre-planned. It was all had to be off script for it to work really well. But when it didn't work well, it wasn't ever his fault. And that was my big takeaway. I could be very wrong about this, but that was my big takeaway about Kyler Murray was the lack of accountability within their system just did not work.
Well, you saw it on Hard Knocks and film. I saw it on film, not even watching Hard Knocks because you're looking at that. And even if you didn't see that or read into it, you just look at it from a pure football standpoint and you go, not only are his receivers going to be frustrated, but if you're basically running past your protection scheme and you have good blocks that you're ruining, which is what Baker Mayfield did a lot too, but like, and they both played in the same system, which is kind of interesting, but they, for a time, Murray did the same thing. So if you're frustrating your blockers and basically they're working their ass off to give you position, and you're going, I'm just going to go ahead and just destroy it and then get mad at the receivers for not doing their job, even though it was really you that undercut them. You've lost that team. You've completely lost that
100%, because there's no structure, right? There's no there. There's always the old adage: without structure, there's no function.
Yeah.
And there was no structure. There's no function. So I mean, for him, it was, you're trying to work within a system. And it's already not a great offense, right? You have aging veterans everywhere. You have Zach Ertz, who's on his last leg. James Conner's lost a step. DeAndre Hopkins isn't his old self. But you have good pieces. You have Marquise Brown. You have Greg Dortch, who's an okay slot receiver in the NFL. So you have a good system of weapons to work around. If you can make it work as a quarterback, there's been way worse that have done way more. He just couldn't do it. And I think it's going to get that much harder now. The offensive line hasn't got significantly better, if not worse. Weapons at receiver have gotten worse. He's another year. He's older and he's removed from the ACL. James Conner isn't the same as he was. new system,
Will
new
Rondale Moore
coach.
stay healthy? Can they
Yeah,
get the most
exactly.
out of him? Yeah.
Exactly. And he's a guy right now you have the scheme touches for.
Will Colt
It's just
McCoy actually play well enough that they go, huh?
if you honestly watch,
Yeah.
like if you watch the tape of when they was Colt McCoy versus Kyler Murray, there is no contest who the better player was.
Yeah.
It was Colt McCoy, not even close.
Yeah.
Just from like a schematic standpoint, just being able to be like you watch him and DeAndre Hopkins reactions and interactions, I should say, and everything's about timing. And that's who, like DeAndre Hopkins as a player makes his money off of being precise, right? He's a precision-based wide receiver who can win above the rim. That's what makes him so good, right? But he couldn't do that with Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
Because timing doesn't exist for Kyler Murray to be great. Everything has to be off script and without the use of a system.
So maybe the best thing that we can take out of this is that Colt McCoy's going to start the season, and
He absolutely will.
And the best thing that it may be the best thing that could happen to rookie Michael Wilson and second year player Trey McBride.
We haven't talked about Michael Wilson, but he's pretty damn good, I think.
Yes, I agree.
I think so too. If he could stay healthy, I mean, he's struggled with myriad of injuries in college at Stanford. But if that kid can stay healthy, he's going to be, in my opinion, the potential number one target in that offense come year one. I think Marquise Brown will play a role, but I don't think Marquise Brown can do what that kid can do in the middle of the field.
I agree.
That's the difference, I think.
Listen, after watching him, I did a show with Felix Sharp in November and said, I've only watched 3 games thus far, and he's the best route runner I've seen in this class right now. And then when I started putting it all together, physically, he's the best way I describe him just in a short way is he's everything Michael Thomas is down to the foot injuries, except that he has some focus issues catching the ball, but he's working at it. And you could see a Michael Thomas-esque type of
possession receiver for sure, 100%.
Yeah. And with Colt McCoy starting off that way, he's going to get a better foundation than what he'd end up with Murray.
And if you think about it like this, they're going to be working from behind a lot.
Yes.
So what that's going to mean is you're going to get a guy like Michael Wilson developing a lot quicker because maybe he's going to be on the field a ton in 3 receiver sets. So that's a rookie tidbit. But, man, I think Michael Wilson, with all that's going on in Arizona, they're going to want to see what they have in the future there. I think he gets some big run. But, yeah, I mean, he's going to be a really intriguing piece, especially if Colt McCoy starts the year. I think there's a chance that Colt McCoy starts, 10 out of 17.
Yes, totally agree with that. And if they're not winning, Clayton Tune might get half of those 7 starts.
Well, right. If they're not winning, why would you put? Yeah. Here goes this. If they're not winning, is it going to be an audition for Kyler Murray for another team? Or are they going to protect what they think is their future in Kyler Murray? That I think is an intriguing question because, if they don't want Kyler Murray to be the future, somebody else might take a stab at the talent.
Yeah, true enough. Well, listen, I think we earned the name of this podcast by
we definitely did.
I loved it. I so loved it, and I hope that you guys did too. Obviously you can subscribe to the RSP cast. You're going to hear Going Deep with Brandon and I, on every 2 weeks, pretty much during the month. And of course you can find, if you're still on Twitter, and I'm still on Twitter, and I'm like, doesn't mean I'm not looking at other things as well with what we got going on, but you can find, Brandon at Angelo_fantasy on Twitter. Anywhere else you want people to find you in case, or are you still?
Oh man, in case is the right verbiage for what's going on today. My character might go down like the 5 or something. But no, you can find me on angeloanalysis.com. That's where all my latest work is. Right now, really just putting out articles for my subscribers on second years, so sophomores in the NFL. Treylon Burks just went out. Burks and Brees Hall just went out. So doing those every week, probably get a couple done a week, and then just kind of float on into the training camp and into the preseason and just keep on trucking, man. I'm excited to be here. This is gonna be a lot of fun with Matt and I.
Yeah, it's already been a blast. So thanks again, folks. Let us know what you thought of it, and on any of these outlets that wherever we are out in the Wild West here, and
Yeah.
enjoy your week.